Human history is filled with tales of desire and obsession, but few cross the line into the truly unthinkable. Among these rare and haunting stories is one that stands alone, both for its morbid detail and the disturbing willingness of its participants. This is the story of Armin Meiwes and Bernd Brandes, a duo whose actions continue to baffle and horrify to this day. Mr. Meiwes was born in Essen, Germany on December 1st, 1961. He had a relatively peculiar childhood. His parents separated when he was about 6 years old, and he stayed living with his mother, an extremely dependent, dominant, and demanding person, who constantly asked her son to stay by her side, wanting his life plan to revolve around her almost obsessively. He was a shy but pleasant and well-mannered child. Apparently normal, I emphasize apparently, because on the outside he might have seemed one way, but inside he felt very differently. Armin began fantasizing about homosexuality and cannibalism from a very young age. Perhaps the lack of a strong father figure made him try to fill that void with other things, for example, with the completely crazy idea that devouring someone makes them closer. Having someone else's flesh inside oneself is a precious form of union. He became obsessed with the tale of Hansel and Gretel. You know, those two siblings who leave breadcrumbs, go into the forest, and a witch appears, deceives them, and wants to eat them. He was completely obsessed with the moment when the witch appeared to be about to eat them. It was his favorite story. And years later, everyone would understand why. Even with these internal thoughts that he never explained to anyone, Armin had a normal life with several friends, studied, and didn't seem to have any psychological problems. At 18, he moved with his mother to a family-owned mansion. This mansion was gigantic. It had 36 rooms, you heard right, 36 rooms, and was located in Rotenburg, Germany. His friends jokingly called it the Spirit House. What these friends didn't know was that years later, one of the biggest crimes would occur in that same house. His life in that mansion wasn't happy. On one hand, he felt alone in such a gigantic place, creating a feeling of loneliness and sadness. If you add two elements to this, first, that his mother was becoming increasingly difficult, inventing illnesses so her son would stay home with her, and second, Armin began repressing his homosexuality, even having some girlfriends whom he brought home only to face his mother's total and absolute rejection. It seemed that no girl was good enough for him. After approximately a couple of years of living in the Spirit House, Armin decided to leave, escape, and enlisted in the army, where he would spend 10 years. There, he would stand out for his discipline and have very good relationships with other soldiers. His dark, cannibalistic thoughts would be calmed, hidden during those years. He would be so busy doing other things that he wouldn't have time to think about all that. We could say it was his quietest time, pathologically speaking. 10 years. But all good things come to an end, and this was no exception. His mother fell ill, and he decided to return to the mansion to care for her personally. His mother would last 3 years until her death. During that time, Armin would work repairing computers, and here is probably the key point of the whole story: his mother's death. On one hand, Armin was sad, but on the other, it was like removing an enormous burden that had accompanied him throughout his life. Armin felt happy, felt strong, felt that his internal desires, his dark passions were coming back to the surface stronger than ever. Freed from the ties and control of his mother, Armin spent nights awake browsing forums and websites about cannibalism. In the forums is where he would find other people like him who fantasized about cannibalism. Precisely, Armin came into contact with one of them, the second great protagonist of the story, Bernd Jürgen Brandes. Less is known about Brandes's life. His mother committed suicide when he was 5 years old. His relationship with his father was quite cold, and broke completely when he admitted he was gay. In his adolescence, he began to be interested in masochistic practices, pain, but not to others, rather towards himself. He would go to male prostitute establishments where, for a huge sum of money, he would force these men to bite him, make him bleed, and even ask them to bite off his penis. None of the men wanted to, of course. He needed to find someone like him, someone who wanted to do it. someone who wanted to devour him alive. And this is where, as you suppose, Armin Meiwes enters. They met on a cannibal-themed forum, the Cannibal Cafe. Armin had posted a very simple ad. Looking for guy between 20 and 40 years old with good body who wants to be devoured by me. Brandes didn't take long to show interest and verify that Armin was serious. They decided to meet a few weeks later. Remember this date, March 9th, 2001. Armin and Brandes met that day for the first time. Cannibal and Meal met at the Rotenburg train station. They say that when Brandes saw Armin, the first thing he said was, "Hello, I'm your dinner." The plan was as follows. Spend that weekend together in the Spirit House, Armin's mansion. At some point during that weekend, they planned to do it. Armin says that the first thing Brandes did upon arriving at the house was to completely undress and start walking around. He wanted to show the flesh, wanted to show what would be the menu for that weekend. They go upstairs to the so-called dismemberment room, a room full of utensils for cutting meat, and also a bed. There they have sexual relations for a few hours, but Armin notices something. Brandes isn't really enjoying it. Brandes needs something more, needs them to start with the serious part. That's when Armin has doubts and decides to abort the plan. They get in the car and go to the station, but when they're already at the station, he wants to do it again, regrets having wanted to stop. So he asks Brandes if he still wants to do it. Brandes doesn't take a second to answer yes, that he's been prepared for this moment all his life. They go to the town pharmacy and buy dozens of sleeping pills as well as cough medicine. The idea is to sedate Brandes so it won't hurt as much. They return to the mansion. It's 6:30 in the evening. They're on the couch, naked, kissing, but Brandes can't take it anymore. He grabs Armin by the neck and begs him, asks him, forces him to cut off his with a knife at that very moment. Armin takes a video camera and starts recording everything with Brandes' consent, as both wanted to record it to be able to watch it later and enjoy the scene. Armin takes a knife and starts cutting the member. The knife isn't sharp enough, so he goes to the kitchen and gets a bigger one. Brandes watches eagerly, asking him to hurry. Armin grabs the knife firmly and with 2 or 3 quick and strong blows, cuts off the member. For 30 seconds, Brandes' scream is heartbreaking. Blood starts gushing out in spurts. Armin has to step aside to avoid being splattered. This scene disturbs him. He has fantasies about eating flesh, not about hurting or murder. After that half-minute of heart-wrenching screams, Brandes smiles, looks at Armin, and tells him he feels happy and that nothing hurts anymore. He asks him to quickly go to the kitchen to prepare his member. Armin rushes to the kitchen, fearing that in a few minutes Brandes will lose consciousness from blood loss. He cleans the with water, seasons it with garlic, pepper, and salt, and puts it in the pan to fry it. But something unexpected happens. The meat is so fresh that it shrinks and becomes inedible. Even so, he finishes frying the member, cuts it in two, and heads towards Brandes, who is waiting. When they start eating, they realize it's inedible. Brandes is very disappointed with Armin, but still doesn't give up. There's still lots of meat to eat. Around 9 p.m., a few minutes after that moment, Brandes starts feeling cold, so Armin prepares a bathtub full of hot water, puts him in it, and goes to his room. Approximately every 20 minutes, Armin goes to check how Brandes is doing. He always says the same thing. "I'm very happy. I'm bathing in my own blood. This is what I wanted, and soon you'll have what you wanted." After a while, Brandes tries to get out of the bathtub on his own, falls to the floor. Armin hears it and quickly goes to see what happened. He picks him up from the floor and drags him to the dismemberment room. During the following hours, Brandes is between consciousness and unconsciousness, until at a certain moment, he looks at Armin, smiles, and passes out. He's not dead yet, but it's clear he won't regain consciousness. Armin takes the knife he had prepared for that moment, looks at it, and realizes he doesn't know what to do. Murder wasn't part of his plan. He fantasized about eating, not killing. Considering that Brandes' will was to be eaten, he goes for it. And here is where the gore part, the disgusting part, really begins. And remember, All of this is recorded. We'll talk about the videotapes later. Armin first cuts off his head, then hangs the body on a hook he had prepared and splits it in two, empties the organs and cleans the meat. After that, he starts cutting up the body parts: thigh, buttocks, chest, abs, back, puts them in packages that go directly to a refrigerator, but keeps a piece for that very moment. He can't wait any longer. He has to fulfill his need. That night, he's going to eat human flesh. He prepares the dining room table as if it were a gala night, a special night. He takes out the best china, red wine, cooks that meat with fine herbs, serves it, and starts eating. At that moment, his mind is racing, going so fast that it even becomes blocked. He doesn't know what to feel, doesn't know what to think. It's a unique moment, what he had been waiting for 40 years. When he calms down, he realizes that he's happy, that he feels strangely more united with Brandes than he was in life. Now yes, by eating him, they became one. According to Armin himself, the taste is similar to pork, but more intense, with more substance. In the following months, he continues feeding on the remains of Brandes's body until he starts running out of meat and decides to look for a new adventure companion. And that's where he makes his mistake. He contacts an Austrian guy who has the fantasy of being devoured. But notice, only the fantasy without anything else but talk. Armin tells him he has real experience, and this guy decides to report him to the police. A few days later, they show up at the mansion, at the spirit house, and find remains of Brandes still in the freezer. He is caught at that very moment, and this trial becomes one of the most famous in all of German history, polarizing people. On one side, we have those who think Armin is innocent, that he simply helped a person who wanted to die, and those who say Armin is a murderer, that he is guilty.
His lawyer called him a gentleman in the old-fashioned sense, but Armin Meiwes has admitted killing and eating a man he contacted via the internet. He claims his victim was willing to die and denies murder. The victim, who's known only as Bernd Jürgen B., answered a net posting in which Meiwes asked for a man to slaughter. Meiwes then invited him to his home in the central German town of Rotenburg. Meiwes used a kitchen knife to kill the man over a period of several hours and videoed it all. This video, according to the defense, proves the victim was complicit in his own death. Meiwes says he regrets the killing, although it did satisfy an urge he had to make someone a part of him. The court's expected to deliver its verdict in February.
Whatever the case, in the mansion they found 3 videotapes of about 4 hours total duration. There was everything recorded: how they cut off how Brandes bled, how he was killed, and how he was cut into pieces. As I told you before, the images are so savage that several people had to receive psychological attention afterward. These tapes are in German state custody and will never see the light of day. Armin, who behaved in an exemplary manner throughout the trial, was initially sentenced to 8.5 years for what would be called homicide by request. But in the second instance, the verdict changed to homicide with sexual motives. Life imprisonment. And that's how Armin Meiwes is now, in prison for life.